Hello and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. We start out in the east where the Russians have advanced in multiple sections of the front line and they have opened a new sector. This means that the Russians are now launching offensive operations everywhere across the front line, from the very southwest by the Kherson region across Dnieper River and all the way to the north in the Kharkiv region. There are active operations by the Russians. Starting out here in the Avdiivka section, the Russians have fully captured the fortified positions north of Sukil, and fighting will now enter into the village itself as they will push through to the western parts of it to gain full control of it before moving west towards Wushkhod, Yevhenivka, and south to Novoselivka Persha, and northwest along the railway in the western direction. In the northern direction by Arkhangelsk, the Russians have managed to push and gain control over the fortified positions north of the village and are now attacking the next ones to the north of it, where the Russians are now fighting in the direction of Kalinove. To the east of the highway between Avdiivka and Konstantinivka, the Russians are launching attacks towards Oleksandropil, where they've managed to capture some fortified positions and are fighting nearby others. And at the same time, they've also attacked from the east in direction of Shumi and Drushba, where they've managed to capture some fortified trenches and moved into the outskirts of the residential area. So this is an assault towards Toretsk and New York. The activation of this section of the front line by the Russians is very interesting. We see that the area by Toretsk is heavily fortified. There's this line of defense and fortified positions southwest of the town. To the east of it, there is this line of defense that was created since 2014. It is a long-standing defensive line, and the city itself is heavily fortified. This is the front line of the city of Konstantinivka. The Ukrainians had three major defensive positions ahead of Konstantinivka. They had Bakhmut to the east, Toretsk and New York to the southeast, and Avdiivka to the south. Now they only have Toretsk left, and then they have moved on to Chesev Yar east of Konstantinivka. So we see that the two areas of defense of Ukrainians are Chesev Yar and Toretsk, and to the southwest where the Russians are advancing the most, they do not have any of these areas. This is why the area here northwest of Avdiivka, the Russians have managed to advance a significant portion, about 30 square kilometers this month, and in total over the past 3 to 4 months, they have advanced approximately 300 or 400 square kilometers. This is a significant advance compared to the Toretsk area, which has not moved since the start of the Russian invasion. And in the Bakhmut direction, where even after the capture of Bakhmut, there was no significant changes to the front due to the Ukrainian summer offensive. And following that, even so, then the frontline developments have not been as significant as by Avdiivka. The main reason for the success by Avdiivka is the quick capture of Ocheretine, which allowed the Russians to capture all surrounding villages, while in the direction of Bakhmut, the Ukrainians were able to consolidate their positions by holding the defensive line by the canal and at the same time having the height advantage of Chesev Yar secured, which allowed the Ukrainians to hold on to their positions. The Wagner troops during the Battle of Bakhmut attempted to push through the canal and gain control over Chesev Yar in a similar manner as to how the Russians took control over Ocheretine. However, it was stopped by the rotation of Wagner soldiers outside of the city due to the heavy losses, which Prigozhin blamed on Shoigu and the Russian General Military Command. This led to the summer mutiny. So we see that the situation was similar to Avdiivka. However, the Wagner soldiers never got to take advantage of the capture of Bakhmut, and this led to the Ukrainian summer offensive, which managed to recapture some positions. And now we see positional fighting east of the canal, which goes a bit back and forth, but mostly in Russia's favor. What is interesting is that the Russians started offensive operations here in the direction of Toretsk and New York despite the heavy fortifications the Ukrainians have available in the area. This means that it is a very tough battle and the Russians could take a lot of losses taking control over Toretsk due to the fortified positions the Ukrainians have available, especially since the majority of the supply issues of the Ukrainians was fixed after the new US aid package and additional European aid packages constantly sending additional ammunition and other equipment to Ukraine. mainly focused around defense. This has significantly improved the situation for the Ukrainians. At the same time, the Russians are also attacking the flanks, both the south and the east, in the direction of Jazov Yar, and to the southwest by Avdiivka towards the highway between Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka. This means that the Russians can simply continue developing these offensive operations, and once they succeed, they'll be able to capture Konstantinivka and completely bypass the entirety of the Toretsk area by capturing the flanks. The reason why the Russians are pushing through the central parts is twofold. It's an either-or sort of situation. If the Russians are attacking in the direction of Toretsk, one of two things will happen. The Ukrainians will send additional forces to help defend the town and prevent a Russian breakthrough. This means additional Ukrainian soldiers will go into the pocket that the Russians are forming by attacking the flanks. The second possibility is that the Ukrainians withdraw from Toretsk due to avoiding a encirclement by the Russians. In that sense, the Ukrainians would be leaving up this territory that is heavily fortified back towards Konstantinivka to avoid encirclement. This, however, would be a long process. That means a lot of fighting by Toretsk before they actually withdraw. It could also simply be them entering and then holding the line, after which the Russians will be attacking where they are strong and have fortified positions and have a lot of troops. Then the Russians will be attacking a very fortified area. However, it is a small area, and a large concentration of troops in such a small area would mean prime target for Russian firepower, artillery, FAB bombs, and so on. That means the Russians may be looking to have the Ukrainians arrive into the town to try and protect it and then be hit by Russian artillery and firepower in general. So this could be an attempt to commit more of the Ukrainian reserve to the front line and prevent them from launching the counterattacks that they are doing in the north in the Kharkiv region, where we move on to now, with the Ukrainians launching counterattacks in several directions. In the direction of Vovchansk, the Ukrainians continue to fight positional fighting, where they are attempting to cut off the supply of the Russian troops in the north, and at the same time to regain full control over Vovchansk. They do that by supplying the first assaults with additional ones from the east, where they are flanking the Russian positions and attacking from both the east and the west. This is to regain control over the eastern parts of the northern parts of Vovchansk. So we're seeing positional fighting taking place all across the front line, where the Ukrainians are trying to regain control over the entirety of the area and fully recapture Vovchansk, which would push the Russians out of the northern parts here in the eastern parts of the two engagements in the Kharkiv region. At the same time, the Ukrainians cross the Vovcha River and regain control over Tykhe, where positional fighting has returned, and the Russians have been counterattacking towards Tykhe to try and recapture it. So we're seeing positional fighting near Tykhe and Vovchansk, whilst the Ukrainians continue their counterattack operations here in the north by Vovchansk and Tykhe. To the west, by Hlyboke, the Ukrainians have managed to gain a foothold within the town after continuous operations in the direction of it. Heavy fighting continues as the Russians are performing street fighting in an attempt to push the Ukrainians out, and the Ukrainians are constantly sending additional troops and equipment to hold the foothold and expand it to gain control over Hlyboke. The Russian fortified positions in the area are to the north of the town, which does not overlook the town itself, but are instead facing in a northern direction. Instead, the fortified positions here to the east are located on the heights overlooking the entire area. The Ukrainians, if they recapture this fortified position, would be able to recapture Hlyboke. Their attempts here by the western side are difficult to succeed with, as although they will have this open field to drive through the roads and enter Hlyboke with a quick pace and avoid Russian fortified positions, they would still not gain full control over Hlyboke due to the supportive positions of the Russians in the east. The Ukrainians would need to cut off the supplies of this fortified position or take it head on. In either case, they would be a target for Russian artillery being exposed out in the open against a fortified position on the high ground. This means that the Ukrainian attempt here by the west is likely to flank this position, expand the front line, and attack it from multiple directions in a massive attack. And at the same time, before attacking it, launching massive strikes on those positions, especially with FPV drones, trying to clear out the trench without fighting it by launching artillery and drones instead of storming it head on. So there are these two possibilities of how the Ukraine are going about this, and they're likely putting the main force in the direction of Tykhe instead of the fortified positions where they're relying heavily on long-range firepower. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.